Dear God of grace upon grace, grant that we might hear what you would have us hear, grant that we might see what you would have us see, and grant that we might do what you would have us do. In the name of the triune God, amen. So after hearing all three of those lessons today, and the psalm, all are confusing. So we can't go through every single one. And if you have specific questions about any of them, I'm sure Reverend Amy would like to answer any of those. Like, does that sound like Jesus? Go, let the dead bury the dead? But there's a story behind that, but that's not the story I'm going to cover today. Where he says, who plows looking forward and not looking back, is a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. But before I do that, I want to tell you a story. There was a family that was coming home from church, and as they were going to lunch. And as they were going to lunch, there was a car on the side with its hood up, apparently in big trouble. And it was an older car, there were some dents in it. It had been bleached out by the sun, and sitting in front of it was this guy that was not very well dressed and looked like he was hot and bothered and frustrated because his car had a problem. And so the young son in this car said to his father, he said, "Daddy, aren't we going to help him?" And the father, who knew the dangers of stopping to help someone, said to him, "No, we have to get to the restaurant before the restaurant closes for lunch." The little boy continued, "He looks like he could really use some help. Maybe we should help." And the father snapped back at him, "We don't have time," and just drove right on. And then the boy in the back kind of queried, he said, "This sounds a little bit like the story of the Good Samaritan we heard in Sunday school today, Dad. Shouldn't we stop?" Why are kids so good at getting directly to the point? I've been in that position where we've walked on by. You can't second guess sometimes what kids do. Sometimes they just do the proper thing. Now, sometimes they don't do the proper thing, but many times they do the proper time. So, what really caused the father not to stop? What causes us not to stop to help someone? Our tagline here at Good Samaritan Episcopal Church in Brownsburg is that the church that serves. How far does that go? Does that stop at our service that we do just on Sundays or just during the week? Where do we draw the line? And we have many ways to serve, and if you're interested in serving and want more information, you can talk to me or any one of our ministry leaders. But I digress. This past week, I served as the chaplain to kayak camp at Waycross. And while that sounds like it might be a lot of fun, it is also a lot of work. These were 7th and 8th graders, okay? And one of the things we tried to do is help them see how kayaking actually relates to real life. Okay, now, see if you can follow along with me here. We camped at an outfitter's that was really close to where all the kayaks and canoes were the night before, cooked our own meal out on a fire, and then the next morning we went to the Blues Canoes main building and got fitted for our life jackets. Everybody had to be fitted for the life jackets to make sure that they didn't go above your ears. How many people in here have kayaked before? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So everybody's going around trying to lift up their vests to see if their life jackets to see if they were on correctly, and then the staff drove us to the point upriver, and I say river, it actually was a big creek, where we would launch and come back down, back to the beach outside of Blues Canoes, and it was about a 9-mile trek there. And we drove in these air-conditioned-less antique airport shuttle buses, okay? You got the picture? First thing I said to the guy, is it okay if I roll my window down? Because it's really hot in here. And it was about a 30-minute drive out to our launch point. And when we got out there, the backpack with our lunches wasn't there. Ooh. So that became problematic. And the person that was supposed to bring that bag, when asked, said, well, I thought somebody else would get it. So we very quickly called the outfitters, or they called them back, and we waited for them to bring our lunch backpack to us. And in the meantime, that gave us a great time for prayer. All right, so we prayed that we would have a great day on the river. You know, last week, you may recall, we had a series of thunderstorms and torrential rain and lots of wind. And this day happened to be a beautiful day. The sun was out. It was shining. It was hot. It was a little muggy. But finally, the guy from Blues Canoes came up, and we got the bag, and I told him he was my favorite Uber Eats driver, and we all started launching. We started launching, and there were a total of 15 of us. And, you know, wherever we go in a camping situation, we always stay together. So some counselors went ahead of us, and then everybody else got launched into the water, and then we all started down at the same time. And we stayed together on this trek. And we began really what was a 9-mile journey together, all of us. Now, the first kayak to overturn was one who was trying to a younger kayaker who was trying to kind of maneuver the waves. And then there was this older kayaker who was trying to help him. And that person didn't allow for how wobbly it was. And then I went right into the water. Lost my good glasses, lost my water bottle, went riding down. My camera was in a bag, and someone grabbed my water bottle. Another person grabbed the camera bag, and everyone turned around to stop to help us that were out of our canoes. And it was deep enough there that I went all the way down. So it was I was underwater, but we got the first and second kayakers to go into the water back up and going, and we continued on our journey. And then it was break time, and we found a place where we could have snacks. So the current in some places was a little stronger than others, and there were some tributaries that went through here. And another young kayaker kind of got sideways, and there was a big log in this tributary, and she fell over. And so then, fortunately enough, it was right across from where the beach was. So the counselors were yelling instructions at her as to what to do, you know, how to stand up. You know, it was shallow enough she could stand, grab your stuff, flip the canoe. She wasn't really getting it. So finally, Zella, who was one of the directors of Waycross, went out into the water, pulled her up, got her back in the kayak, and pushed her over to the beach. And then Zella slipped and went going down the river like this. And then she caught and came and joined us. She finally got up and came and joined us for snack. And we all had snacks until we journeyed further with no more incidents until it was time for lunch. So you can imagine trying to get everybody to go to one of the beaches on either side of these tributaries that we're going. So finally, we got everybody over for the lunch break. And peanut butter and jelly sandwich, warm by the sun and wet by the dew, never tasted so good. Whew. So once back in the river, we continued on our trek, and there were some beautiful wildlife. We saw a great blue heron that kind of went ahead of us like this, kind of leading the way. It was really cool. Perched in trees above us, and there were all kinds of other wildlife, snakes and turtles, once we got going again, I was in the front a little bit, and that's when we had it. There were 3 of us and me in the front, 3 kids and me in the front. And some of the boys that were kayaking decided they wanted to try the ripples represented where a log was, and you know, you could kind of take your kayak right over that, and it would kind of move along a little quicker. So that's when we had the 5 kayak pileup that all 5 capsized at the same time. It was I didn't see it, but I saw the aftermath when we tried to turn around. But being in front of the group, the current was really strong, and trying to turn around and paddle upstream, we did not move at all. We weren't moving at all, and it was very exerting to try to just maintain, you know, your space. So we actually grabbed some trees that were over the creek and held on to those. And then I held on to one of the kayaks, and then there was another one that held on to one of the trees, and we waited until they could all get, the counselors and everybody went over to help them and got them back situated, found some caps, lost some caps, found some sunglasses, lost some sunglasses. So everybody got back in their kayaks, and then finally we started going on again, and we realized through modern technology that the weather was about to change on us. So here we'd had this beautiful day. The sun was out, so the decision was made that we had to make a huge team effort for this last 3 miles of our 9-mile journey to get back to the beach where Blues Canoes was and get docked, and that's where our campsite was. So sometimes the surrounding environment can cause issues with our journey, but we kayaked onward nonetheless, and we set our faces toward the return area. However, the weather turned very quickly. I don't know if you remember I think it was Wednesday. Yeah, it was last Wednesday. The storms that came across. So we decided, Blues Canoes told us that there was no way probably that we would get to go out the next day. So we decided to pack up our tents and go back, and that's when the storm hit. And it was crazy. And if you know Brown County at all, you know that it just takes a little bit of wind and storm for those trees to fall on the roads and block those roads. And the story about the Good Samaritans that stopped to help remove the trees is another sermon that I'm not doing today. But we had help. They were all ready. There was one truck that had a saw and a chain in the car ready to go and helped move those trees. But if we back to the river story, if we look at the river as our earthly life, kayaking along together, we stop when one of us capsizes to help. We assist by catching things that might get lost along the way, water bottles, hats, glasses, a kayak paddle floating down right by you. And we wait until that person's back on track, back in the kayak. And we don't really judge why they capsize, except if they're young boys doing things they shouldn't do. And we help and serve them in any way that we can. So in today's gospel, Jesus is setting his kayak, his face toward Jerusalem. He knows the direction he's going, and I find this translation very interesting because we really don't use expressions like that. You know, when you go to the grocery store, you don't say, I'm setting my face toward Kroger, or I'm setting my face toward the mall, or I'm setting my face toward the Ball Diamond. We don't talk like that. But what does that mean? Set your face towards a location. Well, in just thinking about this, the most direct way from Galilee to Jerusalem was through Samaria. But most Jews avoided that because there had been quarrels between the Jews and the Samaritans for centuries. Imagine that. People fighting, arguing. Samaritans would do everything they could to hinder or even injure anyone in their territory. So this would have been very unusual for Jesus to say, this is the way we're going to Jerusalem. And yet he seems to be in a hurry. There's a sense of urgency here. And we know what happens in Jerusalem. I'm not sure I would have been in a hurry to go that way. But he is. There's a real sense of mission and a real sense of urgency. And then, furthermore, to even attempt to find hospitality in a Samaritan village was still even more unusual. We normally think of the Good Samaritan story. But that doesn't mean that all Samaritans were like that necessarily, or that's what everybody did. So there was a real rift between the Jews and the Samaritans. And so what Jesus actually was doing perhaps was extending a hand of friendship to people who were his enemies. And they didn't respond very well. And not only was he extending a hospitality, but the hand of friendship, and it was refused by the Samaritans. So then maybe that makes sense why James and John wanted to retaliate, right? I always wondered, why on earth would they want to do that? Why are they doing that? Why, if they're followers of Jesus, why would they want to bring down flames or lightning and destroy the village? But that helps me understand that a little better. But here Jesus is clearly demonstrating the idea of acceptance in this passage. You know, how do we deal with people who think or behave differently than we do? How do we deal with people who think or behave differently than we do? I think we have to love them regardless. We have to extend the invitation of love and not hate. You know, a common invitation to the Holy Sacrament, the Eucharistic service, is, let all who love the Lord come here to this table. You know, one of the things I have always liked about our services is, in the Episcopal Church, all are welcome at this table. And we could be on polar ends of an issue and name it whatever it is. And yet the great equalizer is we come to this space to receive Jesus, to receive Holy Communion. Maybe we don't have to agree on everything. Even if someone is utterly mistaken, we must never regard them as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a strayed friend to be recovered by love. There's a story about Abraham Lincoln that I find very interesting. He was criticized by people for being too courteous to his enemies and reminded that it was his duty to destroy them. So these would have been fellow Americans when we dissect this just a little bit. So Abraham Lincoln's being criticized about being too courteous to his enemies. And he says, he's reminded by this group that it was his duty to destroy them. And his answer was, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? Even if someone is utterly mistaken, we must never regard them as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a strayed friend to be recovered by love. Which goes along exactly with what Presiding Bishop Curry said many, many times. If it's not about love, it's not about God. So no matter what the weather is or the condition of the river, we are all here to kayak each other home. Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, and so must we. Amen.